Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Study Smarter, Not Harder, ECBA Certification. I am your host, Tiffany Aquilino, and I work on the marketing team at IIBA. IIBA is an independent, not-for-profit professional association serving the global business analysis community. A recognized thought leader dedicated to elevating the discipline of business analysis, we provide our global community with relevant tools, resources, and networking opportunities. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Questions tab in your control panel. We will answer some of your questions at the end of the session as time permits. You can find today's deck in the Handouts tab. Today's recording will be available for a limited time on our webinar's archives page within 7 business days of the broadcast. I'm here with your speakers today, Dr. Michael White and Isabel Fair-Waters. Michael is a founder of the Business Analysis Doctor, a global business analysis training provider. He has been a business analysis practitioner for over a decade. He has driven innovation at some of the top financial institutions and holds a doctorate in business administration, CBAC, AAC, CBDA, and a CSSGB. Isabel has over 20 years experience building talent and leadership in the workplace through learning certification and credentialing programs and practices. She holds a professional certification as a certified training and development professional and a certified association executive, and she's passionate about learning and development. In today's webinar, our speakers will discuss the starting point in the ECBA certification process, the requirement, study tactics, and more. We will open today's webinar with a quick poll. You can submit your responses using the voting tool in your control panel. The poll will be open for approximately 1 minute. And I'm going to launch the poll. Where are you in your ECBA journey right now? Thinking about getting started? I've purchased my ECBA application. I am studying for the exam. I have my exam scheduled. And I'm seeing some responses coming in. Give a couple more moments to gather your responses. And it looks like we've got more than half or 80% of the audience who have voted. And I'm going to close the poll now, and I'm going to share the results. Thank you for your responses. It appears that most of our audience are really in the thinking about getting started stage. So without further ado, I'll hand the discussion off to Isabel to get us started. Moving into the Know Your Requirements section.
Got it. Thank you so much. Well,
no problem.
It was very interesting to see the poll results and to see that so many of you are thinking about the ECBA and that so many of you are already in progress and everywhere in between. So thank you very much, Tiffany. I'm thrilled to be able to talk about our certifications. And so what I'll do is I'll just quickly go over what our certifications are and then certainly dig into the ECBA in terms of what it is and how you go about getting there. And then we'll take a couple of minutes to look at the application requirements as well as the exam requirements. So let's take a look at this slide. So these are the certifications that we have at IIBA. And you'll see across the top, we have 3 certifications that we call our core certifications, and the bottom are specialties or specialized certifications. And so the difference here is that the core certifications align with where people are in their careers. So for ECBA, for example, you don't need any work experience to attain this certification. But for CCBA, you need 2 to 3 years, where for CBAP, you need 5+ years. And then when you look at our specialized certifications, these are for people working in business analysis with some experience in business analysis, but they're focusing in on agile, or they're working with business data analytics, or they're working in a cybersecurity analysis space. So those would be the certifications for them. Now, what's interesting is that you don't have to have one to get the other. All of these certifications are independent standalones, and you can acquire various ones, but you don't have to have one to get the other. So the ECBA is the entry level to the profession, and you don't need to have experience, as I indicated. So it's great for individuals who are recent graduates or students, new professionals, and functional managers. And these are people who really want to learn and be recognized for their fundamental knowledge about the business analysis profession and the standards, practices, and competence that are required at this level. So if we go on to the next slide, we see that the ECBA is a competency-based certification. And so what that means is that it is based on a body of knowledge, and the body of knowledge is the BABOK guide, which based on the poll, many of you are familiar with, and some of you are very, very familiar with. So you'll know that the BABOK has 53 competencies that outline the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required for the profession. And what they are is they're organized into 6 major knowledge areas. And you can see the knowledge areas here. So if you look at sort of the right side of the screen here, you'll see business analysis, planning, and monitoring as a knowledge area, all the way around to solution evaluation. Now, one of the things you'll see here, because this is focusing in on ECBA, is there's also the business analysis knowledge competencies. And these ones are really important to this certification and at this level, because what they do is they really cover off business analysis and the business analyst profession, techniques, key concepts, and really the essentials of what it's like to work in this field. So let's go on to the next slide and look at sort of how you get there and what the steps are. So we've got some 6 easy steps outlined here. Maybe not so easy, but you know they're easy enough to go through. So first of all, we recommend that you always review the eligibility and make sure that you understand what that is. Now, of course, in this webinar, we're going to talk about that, but you know, we do have resources and handbooks on our website that will help you with that information as well. Log in or create an IIBA profile. That's really important because this is your own special profile. This is a way for you to complete your goals as you go through the certification, as well as put in some professional development hours into your special BA development log that we'll talk about in a minute as well. You pay the application fee, then you make sure that you've entered all your hours, you pay the exam fee, you study along the way, of course, take the exam, pass the exam, and you're certified. So those in a nutshell are the steps. So let's go on to the next slide and take a little bit of a deeper look at the application requirements. So there's 3 requirements. The first one is very important in terms of to be eligible for this certification, you need to acquire and log into your BA development log 21 professional development hours. So these hours can come from courses, online courses, classroom-based courses. They can come from webinars, conferences, so whether it's a conference track or somebody giving a keynote speak. IIBA chapter events and study groups can provide you with these professional development hours, as well as self-directed learning. So self-directed learning is where you are learning on your own, and this could be especially studying and learning and really getting to understand all of the standards and concepts within the BABOK guide, for example. Now, a couple of things to remember about the professional development is that it has to be, the content has to align with the BABOK guide. So, as we looked at the knowledge areas and the competencies, what you're putting in for professional development hours has to align with that. It has to be taken within the last 4 years. So you can't put something in there that you took 10 years ago. It has to be 4 years ago. And of course, as I said, you do need to record it into that special BA development log. And the other requirements for the application are to agree to the Code of Professional Conduct and Ethical Standards. And these are very common to professional certifications, and then agree to some general terms and conditions. So that's the application piece. So then what happens is once you've done that and submitted, then you're ready to focus in on the exam. So the exam itself is an online remote proctored exam. And what that means is that you can take the exam at any time, any place, as long as you have a quiet room with no distractions. You are able to, take the exam that way. The exam itself is 50 multiple choice questions, and it's a knowledge-based exam. So what that means is that there are no scenario questions, there's no case study, there's just a question, and then you have potential 4 answers, A, B, C, D, and you go through the exam that way. Now you have 1 hour to complete this exam, which is plenty of time for this type of an examination. So we'll go on to the next slide. So one of the questions that I'm often asked is, so how do I know sort of what to concentrate on in terms of the exam? Well, there's a few things that are on the IIBA website that help you sort of direct and focus. And one of them is the ECBA exam blueprint. And what the exam blueprint does is it gives you a sense of what percentage of the content is on the exam. So it actually shows the percentage breakdown of the questions in each of the knowledge areas. So you can see here in this wheel, you can see the knowledge areas we referred to earlier. And you can see, for example, that the requirements analysis and design definition is 24%. And you can see underneath that the strategy analysis is 5%. So right away, you get a sense of where the weighting is and which areas you should possibly concentrate on more, or if you have a bit of a gap in one of the higher percentage areas, that again you want to focus your attention a bit more on that. And one more slide, if you forward for me, please, Tiffany, thank you. And this is just to again sort of reinforce that we do have a lot of different resources on our website. And I do encourage you to look at the blueprint, to go through the competencies, to know what the knowledge areas are, and to look at any other pieces of content that we have on there for you to help your journey through with the ECBA, and also to help you with your exam. So that covers off the requirements, and I will hand it back to Tiffany to then continue on.
Thank you, Isabel. That was a great overview. We're going to open up another poll question now. Again, you can submit your responses using the voting tool as you've just done before. The poll will be open again for approximately 1 minute. So I'm launching the poll now. What's your biggest challenge with studying right now? Getting motivated, understanding the materials, finding the time, or access to the right resources? And as mentioned, We'll give you about 60 seconds to start populating your feedback. And I feel like you guys don't even need 60 seconds because the majority of you have already submitted your responses. I'll keep it open for a couple more moments and we'll share the results. Thank you, everyone, for your responses. And here are our results. So it looks like the numbers are kind of all split between the 4 categories there, but finding the time seems to be one of the biggest challenges. Thank you again. I'm now going to move the presentation over to Michael, who will share some information about study best practices.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Isabel, for that wonderful overview. And thank you, Tiffany, for the lead in here. And welcome, everybody, again. So we're going to talk about studying, right? This is why we're all here, how to study for the ECBA. And so I'm going to start off with talking about a concept that many of you may have heard of, which is the 5 W's, okay? But we're going to call it the 5 W's of studying. So it's really the 5 W's and an H, right? And, you know, that includes, you know, the who, what, where, when, why, and then how. But we're going to talk about it in a way of how you should be applying these concepts to BABOK and to general overview of study practices. So let's start with the first W, which is who. So who is studying? Who is you, right? Who is you? Who am I? Who am I as a studier? So what that means is you're basically asking yourself as a learner, what is my learning style? So you may have seen these, the auditory learner, the visual learning, or the kinesthetic learner. These are actually concepts that are actually in BABOK as well in the underlying competencies, just an FYI. But there are also, you know, other sources that have maybe 4 or 5 different learning styles. So it can vary a little bit, but these are the 3 core learning styles. So let's talk about the auditory learner. So the auditory learner is the person that likes to hear information. They work best with presentations, lectures, you know, hearing the information, audiobooks. They really like to hear the information. A lot of the times they have to sound things out and kind of talk it out in order to really grasp it at that next level. And then we have our visual learners. These are the people who like to see, they like to read, they like diagrams, pictures, anything visual, right? They usually have to visualize things in their head to really memorize it or kind of act out, not act out, they have to play out visual themes in their heads in order to really kind of put the puzzle pieces together. They're very good at drawing things as well. And then you have the kinesthetic learner. If you ever heard yourself say, I need to do it in order to learn it, or I learn best by doing, then you're probably a kinesthetic learner. And these are the people who like to interact with what they're learning. They like to touch it, be involved, right? They're like hands-on experience in scenarios. From what I've found, I think a lot of people are a combination of a kinesthetic learner and one of the other two. So I always start my courses with having people figure out a way to understand their learning style, because if you're finding yourself constantly studying, using flashcards or using this or whatever, and you're not memorizing the information, chances are you are not studying in alignment with your study style. So if this is a new concept to you, I would recommend going to some type of website. The one that I always recommend is howtostudy.com. That's how-to-study.com, and take their learning assessment. or you can go to barklearn.com. That's BARK-learn.com, and just take one of those study style tests and just kind of get familiar with the study style that works best for you or is recommended for you. And like I said, many people might be a mixture of these, and that's okay too, just as long as you're on the right track. Okay, and so now we're going to look at how your learning styles really kind of aligns with what we call the learning pyramid. I don't know if many of you are familiar with this, but it is it's a concept that a lot of educators are familiar with. But basically, there are several types of learning, right? So you've got your lectures, reading, audio, visual, demonstration, discussion, and all these other things. So each of these really are aligned with a type of learning style, right? So as you can see here, the discussions, practices doing, and teaching others is a part of the kinesthetic learning style, where the reading, audio, visual, and demonstration is the visual, whereas lecturing is more of an auditory thing. Actually, lecturing could be discussion as well, because you're really listening to other people's conversations as well. But this is the general alignment here. And so what that means is, if you are, let's just say you fall within the visual, these are the types of learning that will be really good for you, okay? Now, one other thing that I want you to be aware of is the retention rates of these types of exercises. So what this is saying is that after 2 weeks, you remember this percentage of the information. So after 2 weeks or longer, you remember 90% of what you teach, but you only remember 5% of what you heard in a lecture, okay, or maybe 10% of what you're reading. And so the reason this is important for you guys as people who are studying for an exam is because this should help facilitate the order of your study plan, right? So if you're going to take a preparation course or something that's more of a lecture or that's going to allow you to have a discussion, that's the key thing too. So if you feel like you're going to do like a live session that's going to allow you to have a discussion, you might be able to take that earlier on. But if you're going to be maybe revisiting BABOK for a second time, then you want to revisit the BABOK guide maybe that second time closer towards the exam, because after 2 weeks you're only going to be able to remember about 10% of that information. So I tend to tell people, if you can just cram, not cram, I don't like using that word, but if you can like revisit BABOK like maybe the week leading up to your exam and just go over it at a high level, that'll do you much more than just reading it a lot 2 months ago, because the information will not retain as well. So just use this as a guide to determine the order of your study information, right? So you would probably do like a course first, scenarios, right? So your scenario questions, right? Your simulation exams, right? So that's kind of like practice doing, right? So that's something you can really start doing early on as well. I will tell you this, that the majority of people who have failed IIBA exams on the first run did not take simulation exams. Please do not try to take any exam without at least doing a few simulation exams. I think that is absolutely key, and not only for an IIBA exam, I mean pretty much for any exam. You really need to get familiar with the pace, the level of difficulty, and things of that nature. So you really want to practice doing there. And then, if you want to do an audio visual, maybe the on-demand courses or an audio book or something of that nature. And then, like I said, try to do like the reading piece a little bit closer towards your actual exam date. So I just wanted to share that with you guys because a lot of people don't really know where to start. It's like, okay, well, I know I need to study, but where do I start? What do I do? So this can kind of give you that roadmap of the order of things. Okay, now we're on to the what to study. It's very important because BABOK is a huge document, it's over 500 pages. You need to understand the framework, the architecture, or the general structure of the BABOK guide and understand what each of these pieces represent. And so this doesn't really incorporate the first couple of chapters, but as far as the knowledge areas are broken up into tasks, and then each task is broken up into a purpose, description, inputs, elements, guidelines and tools, techniques, stakeholders, and outputs. These asterisks here, these are the areas that I and some other practitioners feel are the most important for understanding, not necessarily understanding, but things that are more likely to show up on the exams as a whole. So ECBA, CBAP, these are the areas that are most relevant to what you will be finding on the exam. Now, that's not to say that you should ignore these other pieces. You should definitely read BABOK in totality. I just think you should definitely spend a little more time in these areas with the asterisks because they're more likely to be areas where an exam writer would pull a question from, if that makes sense. And so then we've got our underlying competencies. So you really want to know, the purpose and effectiveness measures. And one thing I'll say about techniques, now the blueprints don't mention techniques as a part of the blueprint, but techniques are on the exam, but they're presented on the exam through the lens of a particular knowledge area or task or what have you. So it's not to say that you necessarily need to know, which task this technique will be used in, but you really just want to have a good understanding of how you can apply a particular technique to a specific scenario. So definitely understanding the purposes, the elements, and the usage considerations is going to be helpful for the techniques portion of the exam. All right. Now, where to study. So this might seem like a given, but you really need to find a really good place to study. And you need to figure out where that is, right? That might be your home office, if you have one, or it could be the library or a coffee shop. I mean, if you can, I mean, we're kind of in the midst of a pandemic, but maybe after the pandemic, hopefully, you can find a nice library or coffee shop to study in. Basically, if your home environment isn't conducive to studying, you need to find somewhere that is conducive to studying, even if it's your basement or, you have to create a little corner in your house, right? And I have morning commute here, and not that I recommend trying to study on your commute, but this is for auditory learners, right? So we provide audiobooks, which people love. And so that's a great way to get some alone time to, like, if you have like a 40-minute or an hour drive, it's a good chunk to, listen to some of those concepts rather than just listening to, I don't know, your morning radio talk show. You can be learning BABOK at the same time. All right, now we're moving on to when to study. So this is another thing too that you're going to have to do a self-assessment. See, the thing about studying is you really have to plan, right? You have to look at your current situation. It's almost like business analysis, I'll be honest with you. You got to look at the current situation, look at where you want to be, and then do your gap analysis to kind of figure out all the steps you need to take to really understand BABOK, right? And so you really have to start with asking yourself, do I have chunks of time to myself, right? Where I just have some alone time. And, if you don't have that alone time, you kind of have to make it, right? So that might mean, you have to create these chunks, right? So this could be waking up earlier, going to bed later, or it could be removing yourself from your current environment, right? Like if you have pets or kids or you know, I don't know, roommates or parents that won't leave you alone, you have to remove yourself from that situation if you don't if you can't fit it in. So I don't typically recommend getting less sleep, but a lot of the times you might have to adjust your sleeping schedule. For instance, if you do have kids and that are at home and you really need an extra hour to yourself before all the kids get up, maybe just wake up that extra hour and really try to use that as your time. Or maybe after everyone's asleep, you can kind of carve out an additional hour before you go to bed. So that really is important for, you know, just having that space and that chunk of time in your schedule that you're really going to be able to commit to. And so again, plan out your study schedule. So typically, you know, various places recommend or statistics say that anywhere between 60 to 100 hours for the ECBA. It's a little longer for CCBA and CBAT, but typically for the ECBA, 60 to 100 hours is typical. Now, I have had people, you know, take the course and then take the exam the next week. So everybody has a different speed at which they comprehend, at which they learn, and, you know, depending on how much time a day or a week that they can commit. So again, this is really just a gauge to just give you a starting point. So you can kind of start here and then look at your situation and then adjust as appropriate or as needed. Because like I said, everybody is very different in this. And so this is just a sample of if you were to start planning out your study plan. Basically, you would just look at a week and say, look at basically, let's just start with the total hours. So let's just say you think you're going to need 100 hours, okay, to study. And so when you go back to the next slide, like your when and your where I can study, um, you think you can maybe carve out 2 days on Sundays. Maybe Monday's a really busy day for you, so you can't do anything. Maybe Tuesday's a good day because, you know, maybe the kids have practice and, you know, they've got all these events. So you've got like maybe 4 hours of alone time, right? Wednesday's not a great day for you, but Thursday, maybe, you know, Fridays, maybe you're off on Fridays, so you can go to bed a little later. So maybe you go to bed a couple hours later, and then maybe you can, you know, wake up an hour earlier that day to get 3 hours in. And then, you know, whatever day allows you to get a specific number of hours. And so basically you can just total those numbers up. So let's just say in this scenario here, that allows me to have 13 hours a week of study time. And if I'm gauging 100 hours or targeting 100 hours of study time, that's about 8 weeks of studying. And so, which means that's about 2 months, right? And so typically I recommend giving yourself some cushion if you want to study, if you want to schedule your date earlier. Now, with the new remote scheduling, you only need to schedule your exam, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but I believe you only need like a 48-hour window before you schedule. So now it's not as extensive as it used to be when we had to do it on site. But I typically recommend people giving themselves, you know, at least, you know, a couple of weeks in between the time that they can finish all their studying, and then, you know, the day that they schedule their exam. If you're anxious to get it done, you don't really need the 2 weeks. But I just like to give, I'm the type of person I like to give myself some cushion so I can do some last minute refinements. So like I said, you know, take this model and adjust it to your schedule, your plans, and things like that, and just start from there. Like you can really just use this as a starting point and then model things out in the way that is, most relevant to your current situation. Okay, so now this is where our theme came from, right? Why? Why am I studying? So in order to study, you have to have a goal, like, right? You can't just go in and start reading BABOK and, you have to be very intentional when you're studying. Okay, you have to set smart goals. This is where we're studying smarter, not harder. And for those of you who are currently employed and working, or in the a corporate environment, you may have heard like SMART goals or SMART objectives. You can apply this concept to studying, and I do it all the time. And so this typically includes specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And so you have to make your goal specific. The more specific the goal is, the easier it will be to focus on it and to take the necessary actions to accomplish it. Um, I took a similar poll with some of my students on some of the biggest challenges that they're having with studying. And some of the responses was being able to focus. Well, if you're having trouble focusing, then you need to clarify your goal, because it's much easier to obtain if it's there, if it's present, right? If you have a goal and then you write it down, right? So it's kind of like the things that, if it's not the things that get documented gets done. Documenting things and being very specific about it really helps you focus on it, and even start rewarding yourself when you meet that specific goal, right? That helps you focus more, because it's like, oh, I really want this award or reward. So now I'm just going to push through it and make the specific goal for the day. And so, like, an example of this, you can't just say like, oh, I'm going to study more, right? That's a very vague goal. You're going to want to say something like, every day I'm going to study between 2 and 4, or I'll study every Wednesday between 5 and 6, or for 2 hours, right? Those are that's much more specific than I'm going to study BABOK, or, study more, or something like that. And then you also want the goals to be measurable goals. And that is almost in alignment with the specific goals. And again, a goal that you can measure is much more useful to you. If you set a goal to a certain number of hours, for example, to like raise your particular exam score, like let's just say, oh, you want to aim for an 80% in all of your simulation exams or your quizzes and things like that. That's giving you something to strive for, right? Something you can actually see. You can't just say, oh, I want to increase my scores. Shoot for a number, right? Start with 70, then increase it to 80, right? So make it measurable. That way that gives you something to actually check your progress, right? You can see, well, if my target was 80, I'm still doing 75. So maybe I just need to, step it up a little bit. And that really gives you an area to, focus on your weakness, the knowledge areas that you're scoring lower in. That's why, when we create simulation tests, we segment them off by knowledge area, so that you have measurable results when you're taking those exams, or those simulation exams. All right, now, achievable. Keep your goals achievable. Do not be overly ambitious. I know we all want to get our certifications. When I was doing my CBAP, I was so anxious to get it. But you have to be realistic with your situation. You have to look within, and you really have to ensure that the goal that you're making is achievable. So for instance, if your schedule only allows you today to study 1 hour a day, don't make a goal for studying 10 hours a day, right? Start increasing your goal to like maybe 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day, something that's really going to allow you to reach your goal in a reasonable amount of time, but also being realistic to your current situation or your lifestyle. So you have to make sure that the goals you're setting is achievable, because if you don't make it achievable, your study plan is really setting you up for failure, right? And you don't want to do that. Now, I will say, if you're getting your groove or you're getting into what we call flow, then I would say steadily increase your goals to more hours or maybe a shorter time frame, to when you have to take when you can take the exam, right? So I will say, if you're finding that you are exceeding your goals, do go ahead and make more aggressive goals once you start, surpassing them. But don't start off with overly ambitious goals, because it can often be discouraging. And then relevant, right? You want to make sure that your goals are relevant to the ECBA exam competencies and the blueprint, right? So like in Isabel's slide earlier, we know the knowledge areas, or the domains that are going to be included on the exam, including the techniques. So, make it relevant, right? One thing I'll say is, the chapter 11, the perspectives, that's not on the exam, right? Don't waste your time on that chapter. It's good for general practice information, but it's not a concept on the exam. So don't spend a lot of time studying that, right? So make sure that your study plan is relevant, that it is aligned with your your lifestyle, your goals, that it's aligned with the ECBA blueprint, and also that it is aligned with the competencies. So as Isabel said earlier, this is a competency-based exam, but it's a knowledge-based exam, right? The questions are pretty foundational, but you also have to understand the concepts. Also, you really need to know terminology for this exam. So a lot of it, there's a lot of it's definition based as well. So make sure that you're really focusing in on the glossaries, right? And making sure that you're understanding terms and the roles, right? The roles is another important piece. So make sure that your study plan is relevant to things that are going to help you understand the things you need to know to successfully clear the exam. All right, last one is time bound. So time bound is you want to keep a tight schedule, right? The more, and this goes back up to the measurable and specific, keep a tight schedule. Make sure that you are meeting your commitments, that you're giving yourself these, time boxing. Time boxing is another technique under estimation. So, use time boxing to set these schedules in this study plan, right? Or your time to read BABOK, or to do these different activities. That's almost another way to give yourself a little bit of a reward system if you meet those time frames. All right, so we talked about the 5 W's and an H. The H is the how. So Michael, you've got this great study strategy here, but how do I do it? And there's so many different study styles out there, but I'll just give you just a couple of tips on that, to give you a starting point. So here, I mentioned all of the different learning styles here. I'll just give you a high overview. Like we talked about, the visual learners, okay? They like the colorful notes, diagrams, summaries. They like textbooks, facts, and notes. The recommendation for studying BABOK will be aligned with these, right? So if you like colorful notes, use highlighters. If you like to remember what, where, do BABOK mind maps, right? Diagrams, use a summary diagram. Most people do well with summaries. So read the chapter summaries before you begin. So really, at the beginning of every BABOK chapter, there's like it's an introduction, but it's almost like a summary as well, right? So utilize that summary to really prepare your mind for what you're reading. You know, if you like study guides versus textbooks, use a good study guide. You know, a study guide should be concise, you know, really be good at summarizing, and hopefully it's less pages than BABOK. Our study guide is only like 100 pages. So that's like a fourth, less than a fourth of the actual BABOK guide. Some people like facts and notes, right? So that's why some people, if you really like flashcards and study tables, then you might, you know, really like facts and notes, which might fall under the visual learner. The auditory learners, the people that like the podcast, maybe class recordings or discussions to repeat things out loud. Word association is another powerful auditory technique. Studying with others, right? Because again, you're listening to other people's conversations. So in terms of studying BABOK, right, if you like podcasts, right, listen to the recorded sessions of, you know, a class that you attended or some on-demand courses. Join a study group. Um, Again, using, you know, glossary to associate terms and things like that. And these are all options that we have as well, because we know there are so many learning styles. We offer on-demand classes, live classes, audiobooks, and then and anything that is really designed to accommodate these learning styles. So for our kinesthetic learners, you guys might like the active note taking, studying with others, applying real world examples, right? This is what we call prototypes or simulations, even role playing or acting, right? You might even like to read the BABOK or reading textbooks multiple times. So in terms of BABOK, we would recommend, you know, detailed notes, what I call active notes, joining a study group. Definitely simulation exams. You need to do simulation exams if you are any type of learner. And then, you know, if you need to read the BABOK or the BABOK guide multiple times, then do that. And we definitely have the resources for that as well. So a big thing with this, I'm going to try to speed things up because I know we're running low on time, is to avoid information overload. Do this by creating a study plan or a study strategy. So use a little bit of the information that I gave you today to start off your study plan and your study strategy. I also have like an IIBA certification study strategy that you can Google on YouTube if you want a more specific study plan. But you need to have a strategy. Just like when you're doing business analysis, you usually start off with the strategy analysis. Okay, take it one knowledge area at a time. You know, usually when you're doing quizzes and simulations, it's allocated by knowledge area. This is because you want to absorb, you know, one thing at a time. Don't try to multitask too much. Multitasking, a lot of people think it's great. Multitasking is not conducive to learning. So if you're a great multitasker in general, that's great. You can probably get a lot done in your life. But when it comes to learning, please don't try to multitask, because when you're learning, there's no such thing. You're really just switching back and forth your focus. So try to focus on one area at a time. Knowing your learning objectives. BABOK is an excellent guide, but it does not really tell you what the learning objectives are, right? So you feel like you read all of this text, but it's a kind of like, what am I reading, right? So you need to know what your objectives are. I also have a tool called the BABOK Focus Checklist. You can get that on my website, but the key is to really understand the objective of every single chapter, the objective of every single task, and the objective of every single element. There are some areas in BABOK where it says the goal of this task or the goal of this technique is. Look out for those, because you want to understand the goal and objective of what you just read. If you don't know the goal of or the objective of what you just read, then you need to read it again until you know what the point is of this chapter or this paragraph is that I read. Also filter out extraneous content. I tried to give you some tips on that. So like I said, things like, you know, things like chapter 11, like the perspectives, guidelines and tools, those aren't really things that you'll be focusing on the exam. So, they're great for giving you additional context, but don't spend a lot of time on them. Focus your time on the areas that are going to be on the exam. And then again, summarizing. Summarizing is a great tool to get to the bottom line. A lot of executives, we like bottom line, right? Give me the bottom line. That's a summary that goes in alignment with knowing your learning objectives. What's the point of what I'm reading? That is the summary here. Okay, so warming up. So for those of you who are still thinking about it and haven't started studying yet, these things here are what I call warm-ups to BABOK, right? So we know that BABOK is a huge document. It's 500 plus pages. Most people, especially if you don't really have tactical or practical business analysis experience, you might want to start with a study guide. It's a lot, usually they're less pages and they're a lot more absorbable than a giant book, right? So start with a study guide, maybe do an audiobook. Sometimes I found that it's really good to start with glossary. Again, this is for the new people who don't really have business analysis experience. You might need to start with the back of the BABOK guide and go to that glossary section and really start getting familiar with some terminology. We also provided an extended glossary, which includes the things that are in the back of BABOK, but also terms that may appear on the exam. Also, please utilize the introduction chapter of the BABOK guide. It's so useful. It really kind of gives you the general framework of the chapters, and it gives you an explanation of the purpose, the elements. So it really helps you understand the importance of each of those sections and why they're broken up that way. Because I know a lot of people say it's beginning to be repetitive or it's all lumping together, but knowing the importance of each of those sections and how it applies to that knowledge area might help you be able to distinguish those elements of the BABOK guide. Active studying. I'm just going to give you some things here. Active studying includes active note taking, which means you're categorizing and organizing your notes, maybe creating a BABOK mind map or some type of concept map, creating flashcards or using flashcards, or applying BABOK to your life experiences or to your job, case studies, right? The application of the content is so important for retaining it long term. Or maybe try creating your own quiz before you start using the simulations. Active studying is the best way to absorb and retain information. So I recommend, if you want to learn more about that, Google it or do additional research on your own because it's so important for learning. But these are just some tips to get you started. Again, applying the concepts, take several quizzes. Again, take several full simulations and target for at least an 80%, 70 to 80%. That's what we say is the safe range. 70 to 80% in each knowledge area, okay? Also capture your explanations. Look at the explanations that are given to you and make sure you understand them. Don't just try to memorize. Again, IIBA exams are competency-based exams. They're not memory-based exams. You have to understand things by looking at those explanations. I recommend reading BABOK at least 2 times in general. So maybe after you've done these things, read it a second time, because at that point, the information is a little more ingrained in your memory. And then, if you want to have some focus groups about that and have discussions on it, that's great as well. So just some quick exam preparation resources. Of course, here at the BA Business Analysis Doctor, we specialize in business analysis or IIBA exam prep. Several different models for you: online courses, on-demand courses, monthly memberships, self-study training. So for those of you who want to do the self-studies, we have a package for that as well. And our next live session actually starts October the 3rd. But if you want to learn any more about that, you can go to our website at thebadoc.com/courses and then learn whatever you need from there. So now that concludes my portion of this. So I'm going to hand it back so that we can talk a little bit about the value of the ECBA if we still have some time for that.
We are running short on time, but that's okay. We're going to power through. Thank you so much, Michael. That was such a great breakdown of the learning styles and study tactics and tips. I love the extra hour before the kids are up. That's something I can personally relate to. But I'm going to move it over just quickly to Isabel, who will really just briefly touch on the value of ECBA.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Michael. That was great information. So in closing, I just want to say, there really is great value to obtaining the ECBA. It is globally recognized, and it really demonstrates that you have a solid understanding of the key fundamentals of business analysis. It builds professional credibility, and it shows a potential employer that you have the knowledge and that you understand the practices of business analysis, and you can really hit the ground running. So what it does is it sort of puts you just a little bit ahead of someone who doesn't have the credential. So with that being said, I will hand it back to you, Tiffany.
Thanks, Isabel. I appreciate that. I'm going to squeeze in one final poll question, and it really just going to summarize kind of how you're feeling after kind of hearing some of the information presented today. So the poll question here is, what action do you plan to take now? And as before, go ahead and submit your responses in the voting tool. And I'm seeing responses kind of flowing in already, which is great. I'll keep it open for a couple more seconds here, and we will see where and how everybody's feeling right now. And I think I'm going to close it now because most of the responses have come in. And here are our results. We've got a large majority looking for books, resources, and materials, which is a really great place to be right now. So we have run short on time. I do want to at least address one question from the question box. We will follow up with the other questions that we haven't had a moment to get to. But the first question that we'll answer is, what counts as PDs for ECBA? I know, Isabel or Michael, if you want to just give a kind of brief answer to that.
Sure, I can jump in. I know earlier when we were talking, this was a question that Michael said a lot of students and individuals ask him. So it, for professional development hours, it's the 21 hours that you need. And so it can be from any kind of courses. So online courses, classroom courses, self-paced courses. On our website, we have lists of endorsed education and training providers. You can certainly go on there and you can see what's available. You can see study groups that are coming up that you can use the professional development hours for, with IIBA chapters, their events, their study groups, or with other providers, and any kind of self-directed learning as well too. So really, as long as you have the 21 hours, you can go to all of these sources. You can mix and match them. They don't all have to be with one. And it's just so that you have them and that you put them into your BA development log.
That's great. Thank you so much, Isabel. I'm going to close the question box and we're just going to move to wrap up now. But before we do, we want to share some exciting news on BBC that we've gone virtual this year. So we invite you to explore the conference agenda and maybe take advantage of the fact that we are virtual this year. And you can learn more about this year's conference on our website at iiba.org. And finally, I'd like to say a very special thank you to both of our presenters today, Michael and Isabel, for your time and your valuable insights. The best place to reach Michael is on his website, the badoc.com, and to reach Isabel is at certification@iiba.org. Thank you to our attendees for being here today as well. As I mentioned, we will send a follow-up email, but please feel free to respond with any questions or comments you may have. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.